Responsible people should understand this, that Iran is against any sort of insecurity and attacks, and Iraq is able to defend itself. Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, the Iranian president.
Welcome back to Inside Iraq. So one of the other key recommendations in this report is that the U.S. should remain in Iraq for at least 10 years. I'm going to ask you, Mr. Cuneta, how will that affect the balance of power in the Middle East?
Well, I think that what it indicates is how important Iraq is viewed in Washington as a piece of strategic real estate. Our eye, of course, is on Iran principally, and we see Iraq playing a role as a bulwark against Iran, and more generally as a stepping stone for our broader objectives in the area. We are currently engaged in a process of coercive transformation, really trying to accelerate and pressure the entire region to change along lines that are preferred in Washington. And Iraq will play an important role, or at least it does play an important role in the administration's view. Whether in fact we can maintain that presence for that period of time is unclear. Actually, what the Petraeus report does, interestingly, in the slides, it ends with a presence of, suggesting a presence of anywhere between 30 and 60,000 troops, but there is not a timeline. It is an indefinite presence, and that's where things stand today.
But dear Rashwan, I mean, the U.S. says it wants to change the Middle East, bring about democracy. These 30 to 60,000 troops, if they stay for an indefinite amount of time, wouldn't it have the reverse effect?
No, first of all, I'm not sure that the United States came here to change the region toward democracy. It's clear, at least in Iraq, that Iraq, before the coming of the United States, was not a religious state. It was a secular state, nationalist one, under a dictatorship of Saddam Hussein, without democracy, it's sure, but the nature of the state was not religious. After the coming of the United States, now we are facing a constitution of Iraq full of religious articles. We are in face of a real force, political force in the country. Now, the majority of them are religious, and what is so-called democracy of Iraq is already now under tribes, under sects, and not real citizenship.
Move back to the subject of Iran and Syria, and this question is for Mr. Zebari. Now, we have heard also, of course, this week criticisms of both countries. Could you tell us really to what extent both countries are really part of what's happening in Iraq, are fueling the violence there right now?
Well, we are engaging them in a constructive, direct dialogue to be more helpful, to support the effort of the Iraqi government, of my government, to stabilize the situation, and to remind them that they won't gain anything out of our immediate difficulties, because really, if Iraq were to fail, the whole region will fail, and they will be affected directly. So they will gain nothing out of that. If they have difficulties to settle their scores with the United States presence, I think there are many other areas they could do so. And that's why we've been very active recently in this regional diplomacy, to engage them, to bring them to Baghdad, to review the works of the 3 working groups on security, on refugees, on energy. We agreed to have another ministerial meeting of Iraq neighbors, plus the P5, the G8 in Istanbul at the end of October, with the goal, with the aim to engage all the players to help stabilize the situation.
Mr. Zebari, when the U.S. indicates that it might have a long presence in Iraq for at least a decade, how can you convince them of your argument?
Well, Huda, I think this is an Iraqi desire, an Iraqi idea, really, that the current arrangements between Iraq and the multinational force, going every 6 months, every year to the Security Council to renew the mandate with all the difficulties that we have been facing. We raised the idea recently in the statement of the 5 leaders, the need for some long-term security partnership arrangement between Iraq and the United States. So the idea is to go to the Security Council at the end of this year to include some language to that effect, and to start negotiation with the United States and other countries in 2008 to reach some understanding for long-term arrangements, because I believe that Iraq still needs the continued support of the United States to stabilize the situation, to enhance its capability, to be able to stand on its own feet and to deflect any regional pressures or interventions.
But Mr. Cornetta, isn't this a bit also, again, of a catch-22 situation for the United States? Because the longer it stays, because the Iraqi government needs it, the longer it will attract people who want the American project in Iraq to fail.
Well, I think that we do have, I mean, an underlying fact and something we need to contend with is that the presence in Iraq, at least according to popular opinion polls in Iraq, is not popular at the grassroots, and that support for attacks on the coalition is rather high and continues to go up. This means that as long as we are there, there is potential for trouble. And it may be that Iraq has no peace as long as there are large-scale amounts of American troops there. Iraq's situation is unfortunately in the shadow of America's regional policy, which with regard to Iran, at least hints of the possibility of war. How Iran will then relate to the Iraqi situation, I think it's easy to connect the dots, that in fact they see Iraq and our involvement in Iraq as a weak point. And certainly if war is in the offing, they are not going to be very cooperative with regard to the American project there. So as long as we are in the middle, and having a perspective that sees us coercing change in the region as a whole, certainly Iraq suffers, and we remain vulnerable. But this is a risk that the present administration is willing to take.
My last question is now for Mr. Zebari. Now, with the announcement that the 30,000 surge troops will pull out by next July, is that something that scares the Iraqi government? Does the Iraqi government have to do at certain points really quickly to be able to reach that next July somehow in shape?
No, Huda, I think we were expecting actually this number of troops suggested to be withdrawn or pull out by next summer is the same number of troops who came to support the surge strategy. So practically it won't affect the overall balance of powers.
But Mr. Zebari, the surge strategy...
By then, Huda, let me just finish. By then, I think the Iraqi security and military forces will be able to increase their readiness, to increase their equipment, their arming, and their performance. So we have time, I think, until then, and those training and those recruitment are ongoing. So the process is not stalled. By then, I think we will be in a better shape and a better position to fill that vacuum that these troops will leave behind.
Many thanks to my guests. To watch the show online and to send us your comments, please go to www.aljazeera.net/English. We've reached the end of this show. Join us next week when we take another look inside Iraq. Goodbye.